Throughout the middle of the last century, Dorothy Hartley travelled the length and breadth of the country to write about the life and works of the people of England. So we are here at the Museum of English Rural Life to uncover some of the stories of the people. This episode, the Farrier. Once, not too long ago, but the time when the witches would still use huge cauldrons to create potions made out of things like snake tongues and newt's eyes, there was a farrier who lived with his wife in a small village. Now they were ordinary folk, a lot like you and me, and they had a humble profession. The farrier would make the shoes to go on the horses of the village, and also help those who owned horses in the village to take good care of their animals. Now at the start of this story, the farrier took on 2 apprentices who were both brothers. And after the first few weeks, the apprentices learned their trade handsomely. But a month or so in, the older brother, he was beginning to excel at the profession. The younger, not so much. He was growing increasingly distracted, as if something truly ailed him. He was waking up every morning thoroughly exhausted. His muscles were full of cramp. And even though he seemed to have a huge appetite, no matter how much he ate, he was growing increasingly gaunt. Not only that, but his older brother noticed that his hands seemed to be almost coming apart, the skin splitting right across the palms. And from the way his younger was walking, the older brother was sure his feet were similarly afflicted. And yet, no matter how many times the farrier or the farrier's wife or the older brother asked the younger what ailed him so, he seemed not to want to talk about it. Until the day came when the older brother insisted that the younger would not leave his room until he had told him what was ailing him so. The younger explained that the reason he had not wanted to say anything is because, well, it just sounded so silly, so strange. Since he had been staying with the farrier on their apprenticeship, he had been having this dream, a dream in which a woman had burst into his room and thrown a saddle over his sleeping back, instantly transforming him into a horse. She had then leapt on his back and ridden him like the wind across the land, so fast he had no chance of seeing where he was going. They would ride to a mansion where she would leave him tied to a post and head in through heavy wooden doors into a huge banquet hall. He would only just catch sight of it, but he would see witches dancing with demons and sprites, engaging in unholy revelry. When it was done, she would come out and ride him all the way back across the land to where she would remove the saddle and leave him there in his bed. He would wake up none the wiser as to who this woman might represent, but he would be feeling famished and tired, and with these strange sores on his hands and feet. Now the older brother was not quite so ready to dismiss the dream as pure fantasy. So he told his younger that upon that night they would switch rooms. The older brother lay in his younger's bed, clutching close to his chest a bag full of the farrier's tools, including the rasp, which they used to file down a horse's hooves, which was poking up out from the bag. That night, just as the older brother was drifting off to sleep, the door flung wide open and in came a woman. The haze of sleep just about prevented the older brother from recognizing who she was, but before he had a chance to really focus, she had thrown a saddle over his back and he was transformed into a stallion. Now it was rather unusual, being a lying man one minute and then a standing horse the next, using all 4 of his limbs as legs. The only comfort that the older brother took was in knowing that the bag of Farrier's tools was still clutched close to his chest and stomach, held there by the girth strap of the saddle. Now the woman, who was quite clearly a witch, jumped into the saddle and rode him like the wind across the land. They were going so fast he had no way of knowing where they were going. Buildings turned to blurs. But he could see the mansion in the distance, getting larger and larger. And it was clear that was their destination, not just because of its increasing size, but because of the unearthly lights that seemed to shine forth from it. When they drew close, the witch stopped him close to a post, tied him there, and then left him to go through those heavy wooden doors into that mansion, giving him a chance to glimpse all of the witches and the demons and the sprites in their unholy revelry. As soon as she was inside, the older brother remembered the bag of Farrier's tools kept close to his chest by the girth strap, and he began to shift his equine form so that the strap rubbed against that protruding tool of the rasp. Filing the strap until it snapped allowed the saddle to slide from his back so that he was once again transformed into a man. He then grabbed the saddle and hid behind some nearby hay. As the night grew old, the doors swung open and the witches left one by one, finding their own steeds and heading back across the land. Eventually, his own witch came out from the mansion, and when she got to the wooden post and found no horse there, she looked about her, confused. As soon as her back was turned on the older brother, he leapt out, wrapping the saddle around her, and she was instantly transformed into a silver mare. Well, now it was the older brother's turn to jump into that saddle and ride her like the wind across the land. He didn't really know where he was going, but he felt sure that if he kept the mansion at his back, eventually they would come to their home. But as they crossed over field and earth, eventually he heard the sound of the hooves making a sort of thudding, clanking clop. The sound of a horse's hooves when they have no shoes on a hard road. The sound reminded the older brother of how his hands and feet had ached so badly in that first stretch as they raced across the hard ground towards the mansion. And that also reminded him of how the palms of his younger had been splitting over time, and his feet too. And so in that moment, the older brother took some pity on the witch. He slowed her down to a halt, dismounted, and decided to use the farrier's bag of tools to apply some shoes to her hooves, so at least she would have an easier journey. He used the rasp to file down each of her hooves, used the hammer to hammer in those shoes until each of her 4 hooves were shod. Then he jumped back into the saddle, content to continue the journey, knowing that it would not cause quite as much stress on the poor witch's hands and feet as it had done for him and his younger. They continued to race across the land until he spotted a blur which vaguely resembled the shape of the farrier's household. There he slowed her down to a halt, dismounted, and removed the saddle. Upon which the witch, transformed back into her human form, instantly turned around and ran off into the twilight. She was going too fast for the poor, tired older brother to chase, so he decided to head back to his own bed and catch the last few ounces of sleep that he could before the cock began to crow. Though it was not the cock that awoke him. He was so exhausted that he wasn't able to hear much. It was the actual shaking of his younger, bringing him back into consciousness, who was really keen to find out what his adventure had been, especially since his younger had actually spent the entire night having his first pleasurable, deep sleep for a very long time. So the older brother explained to his younger the entire adventure, letting him know that it certainly had not been a dream, and it was surely true. They went to join the farrier and his wife for breakfast, as they always did, but found that on this occasion, the farrier was alone. Apparently, his wife was still in bed with a curious sickness that seemed to have developed overnight. The farrier asked the brothers if they wouldn't mind heading into the village to fetch the doctor. And when the doctor arrived, he wanted to feel the pulse of the farrier's wife. But for curious reasons that she was not ready to explain, she dared not hold out her wrist for him to take her pulse. Eventually, the farrier insisted and whipped back the sheet, revealing that her hands and her feet had metal horseshoes stuck to them. And so it was revealed that the farrier's wife was the witch. And the punishments of witches are well documented. But ever since this story took place, the brothers began to spread the custom of hanging up a horseshoe on the walls of your house to let all the witches of the nearby vicinity know that you were wary of them and you were ready.